Hi there and welcome to today's Take Heart. The news is using a lot of analogies to try and describe and contextualize the fight that we're going through with coronavirus, and one of them is comparing them to World War II. And it does feel very much like a battle. And in the New Testament, we actually read about various things that God equips us with to fight battles. And so in Ephesians chapter 6, Paul talks about how we're to take our stand against the devil's schemes. One of the schemes of the devil, it seems to me at this current time, is to create fear in us and fear in the people around us. How we as Jesus' people are to take our stand against the devil's schemes. And that not only are we to be aware of the devil's schemes, but also we're to be aware of the things that Jesus gives us, how he equips us to do that very thing, to take that stand. And so Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 to 17, Paul describes the armor of God. And we're probably going to come back to this at different points over the next week or so. But one of the pieces of the armor that we're given is called the helmet of salvation. And I've always thought, that sounds really nice, but I'm not really sure what it means. So I read a few things to try and work out, what does it mean? We've been given this equipment, right? But I don't feel like I know what I'm doing with the equipment. There's no point giving a cadet some state-of-the-art kind of stuff if you're not going to train them how to use it. So I've been trying to work out, how do I train myself to use the equipment that I know he's already given me? And the helmet of salvation, so I found out, is talking about Roman helmets. You know, Roman soldiers would have these hardened leather helmets, and obviously it was designed to protect the head, which is kind of an important part of the body. You know, I've met people who can maybe survive without a limb, but I've never met anybody who can survive without a head. So you kind of need that. And the helmet, metaphorically, what it's talking about is it's protecting our minds. You know, Satan, when he attacks us, one of the main things he goes for our minds. He tries to deceive us. He fills them with lies. He fills them with discouragement and doubt. And so when we're talking about this piece of equipment, we're talking about a piece of equipment that will help protect our minds. And it's called the helmet of salvation. The word salvation in the New Testament has three tenses. So it means past tense, past salvation, he saved us from our sin. It means present tense, he is saving us now. We're being transformed from one degree of glory to another. And it also means future tense, that day when we'll see him face to face. And in this instance, the helmet of salvation, what the word salvation really is referring to is that future salvation. So in Romans chapter 13, Paul talks about how the day of salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. So put on the armor of light. And then in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 8, he talks about the helmet, but he calls it the hope of salvation. The helmet that is the hope of salvation. So it's this idea of like a future salvation that's coming our way. And there are all these pictures in the Bible of what that might look like. So one of my favorites is Revelation, where it talks about how there's going to be no more mourning or crying or death or tears or pain because the old order of things has passed away. And so basically when it says that we've got a helmet of salvation, what it's saying is that we can put that future hope of salvation, that future pledge and promise and guarantee and assurance of salvation that we get from God on our heads, and it will protect our minds now. One of the ways that I think we do that is we remind ourselves of what we're looking forward to. It's really simple, but we just keep reminding ourselves of it over and over. I read that the Roman soldiers, because their helmets all looked the same, they would actually scratch their names inside of the helmet to identify it. And in the same way, I think by reminding ourselves of this hope of future salvation that we've got in Jesus, we kind of scratch our names inside that truth and just like own it and have it on close all the time. The early church, they had to go through horrific persecution. We've got a record of that in the book of Acts, but also outside of it in the stories of kind of the early church from back in the day. And we know that many of the Christians faced death. They were thrown to wild beasts. They were set alight at the stake and things. And we also know that so many of them managed to face death itself with just tremendous courage and tremendous boldness. They didn't do that because they were superhuman. They did that because they had the power of God, the treasure of God living inside of them, even as we do. But also as part of that, they had the hope of salvation, the hope of glory. And so it meant that they could face death even with a song on their lips. And although the sort of challenges that we're experiencing in these days are different from the ones that they faced, we have the same hope, which is the hope of future glory. I find it helpful to think about it a bit like this. Like I always, before I go on holiday, have just this mad sort of few days of trying to get every single piece of work I can possibly get done, crossed, ticked off the list, replied to every single email, empty the inbox. And the reason I go mad on the work is because I know what's coming around the corner. You know, on this day, at this time, I'm switching off everything and I'm going to completely relax. So I'll work hard now, knowing what is to come. It's kind of that principle. Think of it also like imagine things are really tight financially. You might not need to imagine that right now, but when things are tight financially, inevitably what we do is we count every penny. But let's say Jeff, the head of Amazon, decides to sort of send us $10 billion. He says, you know what, it's going to be in your account by the end of the week. Suddenly, we're not counting every single penny because we know, although things might be a little bit expensive at the moment, the credit that is coming to our bank account means that we can afford to do this because we know what is coming. In the same way, when we think about how hard things are now, what Paul is encouraging us to do, and he does it elsewhere, is to think about, but what is just around the corner? Because when you look at what we're dealing with now, in comparison to what is around the corner, it's not that this is no longer significant, it is significant, but in comparison to the glory that is coming, you'll suddenly find yourself encouraged and able to deal with it boldly and compassionately and with a perseverance. Mike talked the other day on Take Heart about how amazing his garden is. You know, he's got vines coming out of his ears and it is incredible. I have been to his garden. It's absolutely stunning. You should see my garden. My garden is an absolute dump, all right? And I'm in the process of trying to redo it. So we bought this house a little while ago and I'm finally getting around sort of clearing all the rubble, the concrete, the mess basically out of our back garden, and it's taken me forever. And occasionally, you know, I go out there and I just look at it and it's a pile of mud and it just looks horrific. And so what I do sometimes, just to encourage myself, is I get Pilavachi to send me a text of his garden. He takes a photo of a beautiful part of his garden, he sends it to me, I look at it and I think, that is what my garden is going to eventually end up looking like. When I remind myself of that truth, it gives me the encouragement I need to fill another wheelbarrow full of rubble and take it to the skip. When we find ourselves discouraged and having a hard day, what it means to put the helmet of salvation on is to remind ourselves what is just around the corner. Let me finish with this. This is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16. This is what Paul says in the Message. So we are not giving up. How could we? Even though on the outside it often looks like things are falling apart on us, on the inside where God is making new life, not a day goes by without his unfolding grace. These hard times are small potatoes compared to the coming good times, the lavish celebration prepared for us. There's far more here than meets the eye. The things we see now are here today, gone tomorrow, but the things we can't see now will last forever.